Welcome to Unlocking Vulnerability, the podcast that explores what vulnerability really looks like in everyday life. I'm Helen, and in each episode I'm joined by a different guest who'll bring their unique insight and perspectives from across the vulnerability space. We'll discuss the realities behind vulnerability and what it takes to respond when people need additional support. We're glad to have you here, so grab a cup of tea and let's get started. Welcome back to Unlocking Vulnerability with me, Helen Pettifer. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Lauren Peel. Lauren is the Managing Director at Inclusive Outcomes, which is a consultancy that helps firms to design and deliver better outcomes for all customers. Hello, Lauren. It's wonderful to have you on the podcast today.
Hi, Helen. Thanks so much for having me.
Oh, you're really welcome. I'm really looking forward to our discussion. So before we get into that discussion, do you want to give a brief introduction to yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. So as you said, I'm Lauren Peel. I'm Managing Director of Inclusive Outcomes. We're a consultancy that really specialises in vulnerability and customer inclusion and inclusive design. And a lot of the work we do is in the design and delivery of products, services, journey and communications, the kind of the things that customers interact with beyond operational teams. And a lot of our work sits kind of at the intersection of customer insight, lived experience and expertise by experience, behavioural understanding, and then the design and delivery beyond that. Once you've got all of that great insight and knowledge, what do you do with it to improve your products and services? A lot of the work is in financial services, but not exclusively. We work with regulators as well and other regulated sectors, all around how do you go from the understanding those needs into the measurable outcomes. So you know that you are improving and making changes for customers in vulnerable circumstances. And very briefly, before Inclusive Outcomes, a lot of my career was in financial services, in proposition design and delivery, in-house, in customer experience. And I've also worked in kind of the non-profit sector as well around financial vulnerability and financial resilience, which is a real passion area of mine.
Brilliant. So a lot of knowledge, a lot of experience, a lot of lived experience that you're hearing from the people over the years.
Yeah,
Brilliant.
Absolutely. And I think, low financial resilience and financial vulnerability in particular has been sadly such a growing trend. We came out of COVID into the mainstream media cost of living crisis. Many people have had a cost of living crisis all of their lives and generationally, but we have seen this kind of last 5 or 6 years have been hugely challenging, and the numbers of people who are financially vulnerable have low financial resilience, and what that means for interacting with finances, with utilities, with bills. It's huge opportunities to improve outcomes for those customers.
Brilliant. And that's what it's all about, isn't it? That's what the regulator's looking for, that outcome. And obviously you've got that in the title, Inclusive Outcomes. It's the outcomes. Absolutely. Yeah. So with regards to inclusive design, then it seems to be a very hot topic at the moment. A lot of firms are looking at what they can do within this area. Obviously, as you mentioned, the regulators are moving forward with actually, let's make some progress in this. So before we get into that, how would you define inclusive design? What does that look like? What's the definition of inclusive design?
Yeah, it's a great question, because I think, like many topics in kind of vulnerability and inclusion, you could ask 20 practitioners and get 20 different definitions. And I think inclusive design, if you're not in that space, can sound really big. So I guess I like Microsoft's definition. Inclusive design kind of started in the tech sector as a principle, and a lot of the kind of initial thinking came from there. And Microsoft say that inclusive design is a methodology that enables and draws on the full range of human diversity. Now, I really like that because it talks about diversity rather than vulnerability. I think it frames it in the positive. It talks about the methodology, which means it kind of centers, people like us and our clients who have the privilege to design and deliver products and services. It centers us as we can change our methods, we can do something about it, we can change how we work to deliver more inclusive products and services. And even as I was thinking about this call again, and I was looking at that definition, draws on the full range of human diversity, I was thinking there's something in there. It's about seeing that as an opportunity. It's we can draw on diversity to deliver something great, to deliver something inclusive, to maybe differentiate in a market that doesn't have much space for differentiation. So I think it's how do we take that positive framing around diversity and understanding and apply that to products, services, journeys, being conscious that we all have our own biases and assumptions, and using inclusive design methods to kind of tackle some of those. I think when you've worked in a sector for, it doesn't even have to be a long time. If you've worked in pensions or insurance for maybe 5 years, you know huge amounts, and it's really hard then to put yourself in the shoes of someone who doesn't know anything about that sector to design for it. So I think it's how do we work with people, how do we co-design, how do we understand different needs better, inclusive of accessibility, but also beyond it, low capability, low digital capability, neurodiversity, health conditions. How do we take that kind of insight and apply that to the design and delivery work we do to say, are our decisions creating more inclusion or are they creating exclusion? And once we know that, what do we do about it?
Powerful questions, aren't they? And I've been having a conversation actually with a couple of clients recently where I think it's hard for firms to understand that inclusive design isn't just all about accessibility. So you mentioned there around diversity, is actually just thinking that actually some people might be overwhelmed, they might be distressed, they might be anxious, and that then causes impacts to customer journeys and the decisions that they make and things like that. So it isn't just around those reasonable adjustments with regards to the accessibility. It's so much more than that, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think accessibility is a great place to start if you're not doing anything today, or you're in those early stages. Start there. But you're so right, and I think we with our lived experience community, we also talk a lot about overlapping needs and complex circumstances. And there's a conversation I had with a woman who's deaf and has ADHD, and we were talking about the intersection of those things. But the ADHD, she said, sometimes if a firm has worked on the accessibility side very well, actually it's the challenges of being ADHD that can then have more of an impact and a lack of design for that. So things like when reminder emails come, what action that drives you to, what that looks like. So I think there's the accessibility inclusive design, but there is the neurodiversity. What does that mean if you are you just really struggle with numbers, as many people do? Are we designing in that way? There's so many different lenses that we can look through, and actually the more of those we can look through and design for, the better it gets for everyone. And I think that's a big thing with inclusive design, is there's perhaps an assumption that if you design for X characteristic, it only gets better for them. But actually what we know is generally, if you design it for the people who maybe most struggle to interact with the service today, it generally gets better for everyone and easier and better for people's operational teams as well, because you're not driving in as many complaints or as many phone calls that don't need to happen. So I think it's how do you design for lots of different needs so it benefits everyone and gets simpler for everyone as well.
Yes, absolutely. It can often be overwhelming for firms, though, like you were saying, if you're at the start of your journey, start with accessibility, because that's sort of quite clear cut in sort of what is required through reasonable adjustments of the Equality Act. So I know that within inclusive outcomes, you've got those 5 framework levels with regards sort of where firms are at with their inclusive design journeys. So are you happy to share more about those and sort of even just give some of the listeners just a recap of where they may be with regards to that maturity level in their journeys?
Absolutely. So in 2025, we were starting to talk with a lot of different firms about benchmarking. That's where this conversation came from. A lot of firms wanted to know where they are in relation to what other firms are doing. And there's loads of great resources out there, including things like this podcast and your webinars, where people share best practice and share those learnings. But people wanted to understand where they are so they can work out what's next, which is super helpful. You have to know where you are today. So we came up with our 5 stages of maturity. Very high level they are. Awareness is the first one. I actually don't see many firms that are only at awareness anymore. So that the descriptor is Yeah, I think maybe very small firms, but we see that would be, we know we should be doing something, but we're not doing it yet. Maybe it's just that you and I wouldn't see those firms, Helen, because
No,
they're not coming to us.
they're not getting in touch with us. Yeah, exactly.
So perhaps
They
there's
don't
more
know what
out
they
there,
don't
but
know.
yeah, right. And the awareness stage, if you're there, is about the like, okay, let's just take a look at where you're at, what you're doing. It may not be that you're at the thinking about inclusive design stage. There may be other things first, but yeah, we don't see many at the awareness stage. The next stage is foundations. So you might have some of the kind of core processes in place. You've probably done some training certainly with frontline teams. You've probably got systems around disclosure in place, but they are those very good tools, frameworks, methods are quite inconsistent across the organization. That moves into embedding, which is, yes, you're kind of taking that good work, it's being used more consistently, different teams are using it, it's not only kind of within one vulnerability team. And then leading and pioneering kind of at the levels 4 and 5, where really, the focus on vulnerability and inclusion is early in every process. It's not we've done our usual process and then we've thought about vulnerability. It's how does that come in earlier. And we see generally most firms are somewhere between foundations and embedding. I think some of the banks are further along where they've been doing it for a long time. But most firms kind of have good tools and systems and processes in place, or ones that they're developing. And the challenge is, how do we get this out of our vulnerability team more consistently into customer experience, products and service design, kind of monitoring, measurement? How do we take that good work and get it into different areas of the business? And I'd love to come to this podcast and say, here's the single way you do that. I think there's a range of ways to do that, depending on the business. And, we would always talk about how much can we frame this in the positive. It's not, we shouldn't be thinking, oh, we have to do this because we have to do this for vulnerable customers. It's more, by doing this early, what's the benefits? Where does this save time and money? Where does this save operational effort? How does it allow us to differentiate? What's the positives of that?
And sadly, you have to put a financial sort of spin on it, don't you, for a lot of firms, because they need to see the ROI, don't they?
Yeah, and I think that's okay. I think it's, if that's what it takes to get things prioritized, then that's fine. I guess there are lots of I think like I said earlier about inclusive design, there's things you can do where if you design for one group, it should make things better for everyone. Yes. And I think that's the building out that ROI case and the outcomes measures beyond that. We've not just improved outcomes for customers with these characteristics of vulnerability, things have actually got better for everyone. How we measure that and tell that story can be really, really powerful.
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah.
So
you said you got to embedding. Sorry, I interrupted you. So you got to embedding.
Yeah, the embedding. So the embedding stage, I think, is about how do we set those teams up to succeed, in different areas when they're maybe not thinking about vulnerability. And I think some of the ways we've seen that are where people have made it really actionable. So if you're in you're either in foundations or you're moving into embedding, you maybe feel like you're in the earlier stages. I always say to people, it doesn't have to be a massive transformation program. It's okay to start smaller. So we've worked with a few firms who have kind of looked at their customer journeys and done a RAG rating, a red, amber, green rating on which of these journeys are most likely to have the most customers in vulnerable circumstances. What's the impact of getting it wrong? And usually, they will come up within that red category. You might have bereavement journeys, power of attorney, things to do with divorce and separation. We do a lot with life and pensions companies, so life insurance journey, life claims journeys will come up in there. And I think it's a great way to just go, yes, we've got all these journeys, but let's just do these first two. This is a sensible way to kind of structure that. And do that. We talk about inclusive design processes, but I also think you can say inclusive review. It's not about always building something from the start, but we've got this journey and we've maybe got MI or data around it. We'll need to speak to some people around it as well and bring in lived experience and do some co-design sessions. But you can do an inclusive review, which helps you better understand the pain points, what you need to change, what you can do differently. And then use those findings to apply it to the other journeys as well. So you might have started on 2 or 3 journeys, but then you can use those principles to share with everyone. Next time you're building something, reviewing something, revising something, this is what we found. And it's a great way to kind of start small and get some of those learnings early.
Brilliant. Brilliant. And then the next two. So that was embedding, wasn't it? So after embedding them, what are the next two levels?
Oh, leading. So leading is where firms are consistently building in vulnerability and inclusion into their processes. So I would say in this stage, evidence that we might see is things like in the propositions governance process or products and service design processes, that there is evidence around, here is what we have considered and acted on around customer vulnerability. Now, that might be that you have tested that product with a lived experience panel or a community, or you've done co-design. It could be something big like this. It could be we've used our lived experience or inclusive design toolkit and we've thought about this, or we've used this MI and applied it. But I think, knowing that those processes are in place, that they are not just owned by a vulnerability team, but a proposition or product team has filled it in, risk and governance have reviewed it and challenged it. Because I think there's where that can sometimes fall down is if it becomes checkboxy. So it's okay, actually, is it completed? If not, go back and do it again. You need to make sure you've thought about these things. We see that at the leading stage. And actually, we start to see, and this is probably between leading and pioneering, some examples where the kind of products or services are actually, new products and services are actually coming out of that process. So I hope they won't mind me saying, but they talked about it on a webinar with us before. Santander have a carer's card, carer's debit card, which is about, they'd identified that people with dementia or other people who had a carer, particularly during COVID, were giving their bank card and their PIN to people to go to the shop for them, which as you would, and I'm sure we can all think of times where, family members or friends where that would have happened. And they wanted to set up a different approach that was safer, where it's a different card and it kind of provides the access that someone can go to the shop and get a paper or get some milk, get the shopping in, but without that full access. So I think being able to identify those things and act on them and deliver them as new products and services that solve a problem is in that leading to pioneering space. Kind of, it's not just we're making our own things better, but we're thinking about the opportunities and the problems we can solve as well.
Yeah, brilliant. And I remember you mentioning about the Santander card on the webinar, and it just resonated with me because, as you know, my eldest son has got learning disabilities, and there's always been a challenge with regards, sort of keeping his money safe, keeping his card safe, and me having access to that knowledge. So that would have worked perfectly with us. So it's thinking about those cohorts of people that potentially fall under the radar, where there isn't any necessarily any tangible thoughts for actually how can we improve this, how can we make it safer, how can we make lives better because of that.
Absolutely. And I think there's the reason I think we talk about expertise by experience and co-design and working with different groups of people is because to your point, Helen, the data, if people aren't using products and services because they can't access them, they can't get an account, or then they're not able to use those accounts independently, they're not showing up in the data and the MI. So if we're always using only the numbers, the numbers and the data is really powerful for giving you so many kinds of insights in different ways, but lots of people will be missed. We were talking, and this is an early formed thought rather than an exact science, but we were talking as a team this week around, are people with lower financial confidence more or less likely to complain than people who are more confident? Because you kind of, what a fair service is, you maybe feel you're more empowered to do something about it. So if you are, either lower capability, lower confidence, or just your life's really complex and really busy, are you less likely to complain? And does that mean, if you only look at complaints data, it could tell a story that people are having a better service, but actually it's just not having the time, energy, capability, access to do that. So there's something about who's not in data as well, and kind of on what that means and who you might want to work with to ask some different questions of.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually leading on from that, then you've mentioned around sort of several times actually around that lived experience is actually hearing directly from the people who are going to be using those products, using those services. It can be incredibly valuable. It just actually understanding their perspective, their challenges, their barriers that they might face. So how important is it to get the voice of the lived expert in the room when you are looking at sort of designing or reviewing?
Yeah, well, I think obviously I'm going to say I think it's essential to bring in expertise by experience, because I've seen it firsthand, the impact it can make. And it has to be done effectively and appropriately. I think that's the caveat that goes with it. And so we always start with, when we're speaking about with clients who want to work with our lived experience community and what that means, it's always kind of, what's the purpose? What is it that you're trying to achieve? And then let's work through, and what's the right way to go about that. I think that's the benefit of having like colleagues who've worked in customer insights for a long time, is we can think about what's the purpose, what's the method. And I think, we have to remember when we're talking about lived experience panels or inclusive design panels, that the success measure isn't having the panel and it existing. The success measure is what happens afterwards with it. We can't be patting ourselves on the back because we've built it if we're not saying, here's what we've changed, here's what we've learned, here's what we've changed, here's what we've measured, and what does that mean we do differently. And I say that because we're trying to talk more about bringing expertise by experience in much earlier into processes. So if you can work with people about the problem you're trying to solve, and really being clear, what is the cause of that problem in our journey, service or product, and what, working with people, what's the problem, what are their workarounds that they're doing today, and how effective is that, what examples do they have from other places that have maybe tackled that problem in a different way. If you can start in that, here's the problem to solve, and how do we start to design that solution with you, rather than we've built this, what do you think? That, I think that second one feels easier and quicker, but actually I would say, doing it up front earlier could save you huge amounts of time and going, oh, we've been trying to solve this problem, but actually we could have just done this. Like, here's the thing that is the key kind of point of challenge or difficulty. So I think it's about that genuine engagement, being really clear on the purpose internally and with the people you're working with, and then working through what's the problem, and then what does that mean for the solution, to get the best outcomes for people.
Yeah, and I love that you raised around actually sort of the workarounds, because again, just when you were sharing that, I was thinking about, my life with Daniel, my son, and actually we have got so many workarounds that we've recognised that something doesn't work in within an organisation or a product or service that he's using. So between the two of us, myself and my son, we've put some workarounds together, and at times some of those are clunky. Some of those are more timely. Some of them actually do cost us a little bit of extra money. So it's those things, but we wouldn't necessarily go back to the business and say, actually, do you know what? We've put this in place because we are still getting the outcome, but it's all we're going the long way around to get there, and we're potentially not creating a safe environment for those, or it's costing us time or money. So I think the workarounds is key, isn't it?
And I think, and I'm reflecting that back because I think there's the workarounds can be responded to or can have two impacts. So, Helen, in your example, I think if many of those providers knew the workarounds, the level of time and effort and the potential risk that you are, having to do to get the service in the way that it's intended, I think we've both seen sessions where people become aware of that, and it's a massive shock. And to the providers, they've not been aware of, because it's designed for this imaginary kind of typical customer. I'm doing air quotes if you're listening just on the podcast. The typical customer that doesn't really exist, and I think then it's hard if you've never been in that situation. It's hard to imagine what those
Yes.
workarounds would look like and how much
Yeah.
time and effort and impact that
Mm,
takes. So that's one reason that kind of those, hearing different voices, working with people is
mm,
hugely valuable. I've also seen the other side where people say, oh, your website does this or your journey has to do this. That doesn't work for me. So my solution is I do X, Y, and Z. And the
mm.
provider has gone, that's brilliant. We should just do that all the time. Like, why we've
Yes.
made the process too complicated,
Yes.
and actually your workaround is the better thing.
Yes. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
understanding adjustments in two ways is really powerful in inclusive
Yeah.
design processes.
Yeah. So potentially, if the readers take it, the listeners take anything away from today, is actually, yeah, what workarounds might your customers be doing that you don't necessarily know about? Yeah.
Yeah, and
So
that's why
important.
it's so important to
Mm,
do it early, because if you've
mm.
not understood here's the problem and here's the workarounds people are currently
Yes.
doing, you've just
Yeah.
maybe built a solution without understanding that. That
Yes.
can make a massive difference.
Yeah. Totally. Completely. So we've shared a lot actually. There's a lot that you've shared today for the listeners to take away. So what other top tips would you recommend for those perhaps maybe not at the awareness stage, but maybe at the foundation stage? What can they take away from today to maybe help them with their strategies?
I would say know that it's okay to start small. And if it feels, if you've maybe been thinking inclusive design is, oh, it's too big, something that people say to me a lot is, oh, I just don't think we're in a place where we're ready for inclusive design yet. We want to get some
Mm,
other things sorted first. And I would say almost the opposite, that almost the further away you are from thinking you're ready is the right time, because that could
mm.
inform all of that great work you're doing.
Yes, yes.
So there's no right time to start. There's probably no right place to start. You can just start somewhere.
Mm,
Now, if you're that might be, here is the next product that we're designing. This is the next thing that's up for review. It's okay to kind of dip a toe in the water, make a start, but
mm.
you could. I guess my tip would be just start somewhere, but then make sure you're doing that well. So
Yes.
when are you bringing in the voices of people with lived experience? How are you doing that? And then how often do you need to do that through that process? And what will you measure at the end?
Mm,
We work a lot, as I said, with financial services. It is all about can we evidence that we have done something and that it has worked as
mm.
well.
Yes.
So yeah, it would
Yes.
be think about your start small, engage with people with expertise by experience in the right way, which is what we do with our clients. Then work through and how does this apply to the design and then the delivery and then the measurement.
Yes. Yeah. And of course, obviously write it all down and evidence it because obviously that's what the
Yes,
regulator's looking for as well. It's sort of
yeah.
actually, yeah.
You've got to do it. You're right. You've got to do it for the regulator. And
Mm,
I have said to people as well, if you've got a lived experience panel or a community, we speak to a few firms about setting something up that's more regular and how they can keep, using that. Um, it's you can write it down for the regulator, but you can also write it down to make that really shareable. You might have learned something in a bereavement journey that is really helpful for a pensions transfer journey or for a renewal of tariff journey. It's just almost, you might go, we just learned this thing from someone who had this characteristic that we just apply everywhere. So it's
mm,
always about building that
yes.
knowledge base, keeping
Yes.
sharing it. And I think to your point around sharing those adjustments, being able to kind of tell the stories of and work with people who can say, this is the consequence of the process as it works today, and how do we just work together to make that better?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And even just sort of closing the loop back round. So I know that you mentioned earlier with the lived experts of actually don't just get them in the room, get their information, and then that's it, job done. Actually just feedback to them. You said this, and this is what we've done. This is what you've helped us to change. Because that's where we'll continue to keep those relationships with those lead experts alive because they'll be more comfortable then to say, actually, yeah, I told you this was my challenge, and look what you've done. So actually, now I feel more comfortable to tell you something else.
Mm.
So it is sort of really keeping that loop sort of going and feeding it back to those people who are impacted the most.
I totally agree. I think
Mm,
I was talking with a firm a couple of weeks ago about we took the definition of inclusive design, and we were doing what's the definition of lived experience.
mm,
And because I think we say lived
interesting.
experience,
Yeah.
we just it's just a phrase we use now, and I try to be conscious of saying people with lived experience in the same way that before it's, we don't say vulnerable customers, we say customers in vulnerable circumstances.
Mm,
People with lived experience is more of
yes.
a mouthful, but it centers the people rather than
Yes.
they people who are sharing their
Mm,
experiences, sharing their needs. And we came up with this definition that was really about treating and valuing that experience as expertise, which I really like. So to your point
mm,
around, if you'd hired a consultant to come in and tell you what to do, you would probably then tell them what you've done and keep that
yes.
relationship with them. And
Yes.
how do we, with our experts by experience, how do we say, either these are the things we've changed, thank you very much, or I think the harder conversation, and often this is, is sadly what happens in bigger firms, is to be able to say, we've not been able to change that yet. And I
Mm,
think you've got to be bold to do that, but it's
mm,
okay to go, we can go back and
yes.
share good news, but we can also say,
Mm,
we're on with it. These are some of the challenges, but still, thank you. Your time was still really, valuable and hugely informative for us.
yes.
And yeah, being comfortable to do both sides of that,
Mm,
closing the loop with the
yes.
experts.
Yes. And you used the word yet, we haven't been able to do anything with that yet. Maybe just include that yet. It
Mm.
might not be possible now, it might not be feasible now, and might not be achievable, but that doesn't mean that it's always going to stay that way. So it is that actually let's come back to this, maybe that in a couple of years' time that is more achievable, or we can look at that again. So maybe
Mm.
that yet is the most powerful word in that sentence.
Yes, we always say yet. We will get there.
Yes,
That's what
exactly,
but we,
exactly.
even
Yeah.
if it takes us more time than we'd like.
Yeah, exactly. And I shared a quote in our webinar. I just sort of said, the regulators, they're not looking for perfection, they're looking for
Mm.
progress. So it's not about getting all your ducks in a row. You're never going to reach perfection. You're never going to be at the end of this journey, because you're always going to be learning, you're always going to be evolving. So it's about that progress. Is actually right. What progress can we make now? What progress, can we look at making in the future?
Mm.
That's key, isn't it? And that's where
Yeah.
the word yet fits.
Yeah, and
Absolutely.
we're making progress and we're measuring it. That's
Yes,
what I
yes,
say.
yeah,
Don't forget the measuring, and we all get
yeah,
excited by the
mm,
doing and the design and the delivery.
yes,
We have to be as excited about the
about the
measurements
measuring.
of that.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Oh, thank you, Lauren. So you've shared a huge amount of information. I know that people are going to take a lot away from this episode today. Are there any final thoughts that you want to share before we wrap up?
Yeah, I think I would say if you've listened to this and thought, blimey, there's a lot to go at, we could be doing so many things, get in touch. The first thing we do with firms who we maybe haven't worked with before is just go like, okay, let's take a step back. Where are you? What's worked well? What's the challenge? Where
Mm,
are you at? Is it you're ready for an ongoing lived experience community? Is it that you kind of need to focus on one topic first? I'm very happy to have conversations with where people are at and kind of work that out and work out the right next steps depending on the kind of where firms are in that maturity level. And yeah, I think just know, as always, one of the great things about working in the customer inclusion space is people want to share best practice and learnings, and it's okay to ask for help and talk about the things you're struggling with or the things you're doing, and know that there's a huge amount of resources out there as well.
mm. Brilliant, fantastic. Thank you, Lauren. And we'll put all your details in the episode description as well, so people will know how to get in touch with you. Um, Also for the listeners, Lauren and I have both mentioned a webinar sort of last month. Lauren joined me with a couple of other panelists for a webinar where we looked more deeply at inclusive design. So I will also put the link to that webinar in the episode descriptions as well. So please do check that out. There's a lot more information. We've condensed it down to this short episode, but there's a lot more powerful thoughts and ideas in that episode, in that webinar. So please do check that out. So it just leaves me to say thank you so much, Lauren, for being a guest today. And thank you for sharing all of your insights and all that you're doing to help customers achieve the outcome that is in their best interest. So thank you so much.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Thank you. And thank you for joining us. And I look forward to you joining me on my next episode.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Unlocking Vulnerability. If today's conversation has resonated with you, please feel free to share it with others who may find it useful. You'll find more episodes like this by searching Unlocking Vulnerability wherever you listen to podcasts. If this episode has left you with questions about any aspect of consumer vulnerability, I regularly host free Q&A sessions on Zoom where you're welcome to join the conversation. You can find out more at helenpettifer.com. Thank you for listening, and please take care.